Hi, this is Dr. Roskin coming at you to talk a little bit more about research ethics and the responsible conduct of research. So this week, we're going to start with one of the first of four sort of feature topics in research ethics. And that's the topic of plagiarism. So the first week, we talked about human subjects research because I was asking you to participate as a human subjects research subject. And so it was important to talk about that before we started talking about the rest of our instruction in research ethics. Last week, we talked about motivations, reasons why scientists might conduct unethical research. So now we've got the main four topics. We're going to start with plagiarism this week. We'll talk about record keeping next week, authorship in the following topic, and then finally we'll end up with one of my favorite topics or least favorite topics, depending on how you look at it. Least favorite to conduct, that is, but most favorite of mine to talk about: negligence versus misconduct and fraud. What's the difference between negligence and fraud, and what not to do in terms of how to deal with primarily research data. So let's get started with talking about plagiarism. So as last video, I've got an asynchronous Google Doc here that you can go to at the website tinyurl.com/F21 RECR3. So that's F followed by the numeral 2, the numeral 1, RECR, and the numeral 3. And again, you have to be logged in with your Fresno State Gmail credentials to access that document. So many of you are probably familiar with the concept of plagiarism, but I'm here to give you an expanded view of what constitutes plagiarism and how to avoid it. So don't nod off yet. You're definitely going to learn something new you didn't know about plagiarism, I guarantee it. So here's a great example. In 2005, a dean, the head of a college at a university in Missouri, was giving a commencement speech. And in his commencement speech, he included some words that somebody else had used in their speech. But that dean, as he was talking, didn't say that he was taking those words from somebody else. Right? In writing, we all know that if you copy some text from somewhere else, you can't use it as your own without providing a citation, giving a reference to where that text came from. But the same is true for speech. Orally, when you're talking, if you're copying somebody else's words, you still need to provide a citation and admit where that idea or direct quote came from. So in this case, the dean wound up, I think, resigning, or he had a job offer somewhere else in a higher position, and he had to withdraw his candidacy because of this plagiarism issue. So even oral plagiarism is a big problem, and something for you to be aware of as you, again, proceed through the rest of your undergraduate career, through graduate school perhaps, or in your career as a global citizen even. Please don't plagiarize. Now, for those of you that are Fresno State students, it's really important that you know that we have a policy at the university about plagiarism, and it's called Academic Policy Manual 235. So the policy is called APM 235. There's a URL at the bottom of the screen that links directly to the verbatim policy. And I'm going to show you some excerpts so you know what to avoid in this class and in other classes and throughout life. So this policy, which again only applies to Fresno State, different organizations will probably have different definitions and policies of plagiarism, says a few things, again, you might not be familiar with. The top one, I think, is pretty straightforward. I think we recognize it as sort of the generic concept of plagiarism, that if you take an idea, information, statements, or phrases, or even concepts, ideas from somebody else, you have to give credit. But what about that second one? If you put in your bibliography or your list of references cited, or whatever you want to call it, down at the bottom of your lab report, say, if you add in a reference that you personally have not accessed, so if you cite a journal article or a book or a magazine or a website, and you haven't actually gone to that resource, read it, or viewed it, then it's actually plagiarism if you include that reference in your literature cited section. So that's something you should definitely be aware of. Don't pad your literature cited section with extra stuff that you haven't viewed. You could be prosecuted at the university for plagiarism by doing that. Now, in better context for our class, which is a laboratory class where we're doing research, here are some other examples from that same policy that constitute plagiarism or cheating, or fraud at Fresno State. So you might expect inventing, falsifying, or altering data for a research survey. There should be a space there, research survey or lab experiment. Or if you turn in a report for an experiment or exercise not done by you, which follows to that second point there. If others have completed assignments or homework when you've been asked to do independent work, if you combine those two top bullet points, what that basically means in the context of most laboratory courses, especially as undergraduates, is if there's a group project, you need to contribute your fair share of the work in all aspects of that project. If you submit your name as an author on a group authored lab report or report, and you haven't done as much work as the others, that is also plagiarism and can get you in serious academic trouble. And I hope, I've never seen the bottom bullet point here happen in a research lab that I've helped instruct, but if you sabotage somebody's experiment or data, that's also considered plagiarism. And so it's particularly possible to do this without knowing it or accidentally. For example, if your group has a shared Google Doc or a sheet where you're collecting data when different people work on experiments at different points in time, if you accidentally delete something from that document, that could be considered plagiarism. Fortunately, you can undo that, and we have document histories in shared Google Docs and sheets, but still, it's something to be aware of. I've already talked about this top bullet point a little bit. So for lab reports, for essays that you might be writing, you can't copy anybody's work and submit it as your own without a citation. We already talked about that. Obviously, I hope you can't buy data, a lab report, paragraphs, have other people work either for pay or for free on something that you're turning in as your name. And again, I already mentioned this bottom bullet point, that if you're part of a group, you need to contribute your fair share of effort to that project, or else that could be considered plagiarism under Fresno State's rules. So now let's pause here and work on that asynchronous Google Doc if you're viewing this video outside of class. So I'm showing here two paragraphs that were taken, again, plagiarism, important. So I provided the citation for these two paragraphs at the bottom of the screen. This is from a study that was published in the journal Genetics in 1979. And what I've done is I've highlighted in yellow 4 different sentences that all have citations. So the citation comes at the end of the sentence, and it's in parentheses. Okay. So there are 4 different citations there. And now you'll notice this is the first paragraph in the paper, and then the second paragraph. So this is the start of the introduction at the top, and then the second paragraph continues. Now notice in the second paragraph, though, only one of the sentences has a citation. It's a citation from the senior author on this paper, Sidney Brenner. And so this is a paper of his from 5 years before the current paper was being published in 1979. Note that the rest of that paragraph has 5 sentences that I've numbered at the end of the sentences and highlighted in purple. None of those in the original manuscript, in the published manuscript, have citations. So what I'd like you to think about is, and as soon as I ask you to pause the video, please turn to the Google Doc. You might need to return here for reference. Which of those 5 numbered sentences, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, do you think requires a citation? Like, which one of those 5 are you most sure requires a citation? And provide a brief description on that Google Doc of why it is you're pretty convinced that one of those 5 sentences almost certainly needs to have a citation. Okay, so please work on that now, pause the video, and then return when you're done. All right, so now that you're done with that exercise, let's do a brief walkthrough of what you might have come up with. And actually, in my mind, all 5 of these sentences could require a citation. So let's work briefly through some content here. So this paper describes some mutants of C. elegans that exhibit increased non-disjunction of the sex chromosome. So reference 1, actually, I'm not sure that requires a citation. that's basically a generic description of what the rest of this manuscript or paper is about. So there's nothing to cite there. That's just explaining what's about to come. Now, the second sentence, though, C. elegans hermaphrodites have 5 pairs of autosomes and a single X chromosome. That is a fact. That's a factual statement. It had to have come from somewhere. So I would say sentence 2 almost certainly needs a citation. The question is Sidney Brenner, the senior author on this paper, or Jonathan Hodgkin, who was the primary author on this paper, are they morons? Do they not know what they're doing? Sidney Brenner won a Nobel Prize in physiology and medicine for the work that he did in this field. And Jonathan Hodgkin is also a famous geneticist now, although this was the start of his career back in 1979. So no, it's not that they didn't know what they were doing. It may be, and this is a gray area, so you may have said sentence 2 should have a citation, and I'm saying, I don't know. These authors chose not to provide a citation, probably because this is a well-known fact at the point in time that this paper was written. So certainly the case, and this is a huge ethical gray area that's important for you to be aware of and to think about as you write anything, ever, especially in academia at the university. It's hard to know when a fact becomes so well known that you can stop providing a citation. For example, this is a genetics and cell biology class. If you write something really obvious in the start of your introduction, like DNA is the hereditary material, it carries the instructions for making proteins. Nobody in academia today in 2021, when this is being filmed, would provide a citation to that fact. It is so well known. There certainly are citations for that fact, but it's so well known that we've stopped providing citations. And I'm arguing that that's what's happened here with the second sentence, is that Hodgkin, Horvitz, and Brenner knew that people that they were writing to already know that fact and can look up the reference for themselves. But this is a gray area again, and it's safer for you especially to provide a citation if you have any doubt about whether it's common knowledge or not. So we could use the same logic for the rest of this. The hermaphrodite is self-fertilizing. That's a fact, came from somewhere, but there's no citation. Normally, the frequency of males in this population is about 1 in 500 individuals is male. 499 out of 500 individuals is a hermaphrodite. That's a fact. They didn't cite it. So maybe it's common knowledge, or maybe they should have provided a citation. In some mutant cultures, the frequency is increased by a factor of up to 150. Factual statement, probably should have had a reference, but they didn't provide it. Now, this last sentence, we call these him mutants because the most obvious phenotype is the segregation, blah, blah, blah. I don't think that one necessarily needs a citation. Again, because that's them explaining something sort of qualitatively. They're providing a definition for something. So there's no source for that. So in sum, I would say that sentences 2, 3, and 4 should have had citations, but they didn't. Take home message, if you're in doubt, provide a citation. And briefly, we just looked at these citation formats, pardon me. So in text, in this class, Biology 104, you're free to use any sort of in-text citation format, which I mean these highlighted areas. For example, Baker et al. 1976b. That's one format. You can use superscript numerals. So for example, in the second sentence of the second paragraph, if there was another reference down here, you could use a superscript numeral like 67, if that was the 67th manuscript in your literature cited section. So it doesn't have to be typed out. It could be numeric, for example. So the format for us, for this class, just needs to be consistent throughout the entire report, and it needs to follow the style of some scientific journal. So here, this was from the journal Genetics. So Genetics, at the time this was published, asked for the last name of the first author. If there was more than if there were more than two authors, rather, you use et al, which means and others. It's italicized because it's Latin. So we expect you to have et, which means and. Al stands for alii, or others. It's abbreviated, so that's why there's that period there. So it needs to be italics, it needs to be et space al period. And then the year of the publication. So that's one format. You don't have to use that format, but this is one format, you might as well follow it because now I've explained it to you. And then at the end of the document, you have your literature cited section where you list the full citation for all of your resources. Here at the bottom of the screen is an example of one way to do that. So we have, for example, the last names of all the authors. Sometimes you'll see the last name in the first initial, sometimes you'll see the last name in all the initials. That doesn't matter, again, as long as you're consistent. Then the year of the publication, in quotes, the title of the paper. And note that the species name is italicized, Caenorhabditis elegans. Then we've got the journal name, so I'm going to underline that in blue. Journal name. This is the journal called Genetics. So that's what's there. It's italicized because it's a journal. You would italicize a journal, so that needs to be italicized. It's like italicizing a book name. Followed by that, we have the volume number of the journal. It's in bold, and that's important. Then we have a colon, and then we have the page range of the numbers of the pages that comprise the full manuscript that was published in Genetics, volume 91. Okay, so that's a walkthrough both of the in-text citation format as well as one way to do the literature cited formatting. So there's it written out in a better format without me using my handwriting. Finally, I'll note that the top point is very important. Follow citations that you find on websites until you find peer-reviewed scientific journal articles that are research articles. If you cite a website, you're most likely not doing the best job of finding the citation of the literature. So don't use websites. If you find a press release on a website, or if you use Wikipedia, normally you can scroll down to the bottom of the article, the press release, the summary, the newspaper article, the magazine article, and at the bottom, find the link or the citation to the actual peer-reviewed scientific publication. That's what you need to put in your literature cited section. And remember, you have to access that yourself if you want to cite it. You can't just find it on Wikipedia. Read Wikipedia's description of that study and then cite the actual paper. You have to read the paper and then you can cite it. So thank you for participating today, for your work on the Google Doc, and for listening and paying attention. For next week, we do have another Canvas discussion board assignment for you to work on that's on the topic of plagiarism. So please work on that for next week, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.